Hey guys, welcome back to That Florida Feeling. I cannot believe it has been a year. A whole year of you guys actually wanting to hear me talk, meeting new people, finding awesome topics, learning new things about Florida and fun places to go. I'm overwhelmed. I didn't really think that this would make it this long, and you guys have definitely been there to help me every step of the way. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate my friends who have really supported me. Matthew, who's also begrudgingly been on the show, whether he wanted to be or not, a couple times. So all my guests, to those of you who make the Facebook groups and pages fun, and the Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, I value each and every one of you. You guys are part of the reason I still do this every week. So thank you so much. It's truly amazing that it's been a year. And since it's been a year, and this is June, I figured that the most fitting topic for my 1 year podcast anniversary is going to be the most prevalent thing in Florida. No, not Florida Man. Something slightly worse. Hurricanes. Which is interesting, because there's actually a hurricane coming, tropical storm Alex, is heading towards Florida right now. Thankfully, this is a really small one, and I kind of hope that the rest of the year is quiet and nobody gets hit by hurricanes this year. It's just fitting that we're, 3 days into the season and there's already a tropical storm out there. But that's just part of living in Florida. So today I'm going to talk about hurricane season, and hurricane season is when most Floridians really get to know their weatherman, and it runs from June to December. And everybody really does hope that nothing comes near any shore, not just Florida, but anywhere, because these can be devastating storms. And yeah, they're fun to ride out. Category 1s and 2s, you're just like, it's a typical bad rainstorm. We deal with those every day. Some of them get a little bit worse than that. And we've either seen the destruction up close or on the news, and you know that if you've lived through some, it's not fun. So let's talk about hurricanes today. The actual proper name for a hurricane is a tropical cyclone. And basically what it is it's a rapidly rotating storm characterized by a low-pressure system and a closed, low-level atmospheric circulation. Strong winds, a spiral arrangement of thunderstorms that produce heavy rains or squalls, as well as can spin off tornadoes. Hurricanes are called by names and depending on where you are on the earth, and hurricanes occur mainly in the Atlantic Ocean or the northeastern Pacific Ocean. And typhoons is the other name, and that's in the Northwest Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the South Pacific, or very, very rarely the South Atlantic. And a hurricane is usually defined by its well-defined eye. So the center of the storm, everybody looks for the eye. That's really kind of what defines a hurricane. But hurricanes aren't just the rain and the thunder and the winds. It's also the storm surges, the flooding, and the destruction that you're not prepared for. And of course, this is nothing new, especially not to those of us in Florida. The actual earliest recorded hurricane was in Australia in 4000 BC. I couldn't find any info on it because I was like, okay, what made them think this was a hurricane? But this is what I found, so we're going to go with it. And of course, the storms go by different names, like we said, but, there's stories of them wreaking havoc all over the world, especially here in Florida. Each year, there's about 90 named storms all over the world, and half of them develop hurricane-force winds, which is technically 75 miles per hour or more. And for those of you who've been watching here in Florida, a tropical storm is 40 miles an hour or more, which is why there's Tropical Storm Alex coming tonight. Now, the storm is usually classified after the storms hit the 40 miles per hour, and then they become self-sustaining, and they continue to intensify without help from its actual environment. And of course, there are things that help play into the formation of a hurricane. And since we are in the middle, or beginning actually, of hurricane season, it's not something that we have to take lightly. You guys heard my last episode on hurricane prep, which kind of was a fun one, but it also is kind of serious. Because Florida's not a big state, guys, and it extends well into the Gulf of Mexico Atlantic Ocean. So this is something we deal with yearly. I know it's been quiet since Irma. There's been a few brushes. I think Irma and Michael were the last two big ones. We've had minor ones. I know last year Elsa came through and caused a little bit of damage near Steinhatchee, and then a tornado happened in Jacksonville actually, because of Elsa. So we do deal with them most years to a lesser extent, which we're not complaining about. So I can say that it's kind of been quiet years lately, but they've already predicted this to be an active year. And of course, judging by 3 days in and there's a storm, that's probably a good assumption. So let's go ahead and talk about these storms and what we've learned from the past storms. Now, the worst storm on recorded history ever is Typhoon Tip, and that was in the Northwest Pacific Ocean in 1979, and it reached winds of 190 miles per hour with a pressure of 870. The highest sustained winds from hurricane, though, was Hurricane Patricia in 2015, and it was at 213 miles per hour. Now, hurricanes can grow very strong, and they can grow very fast. And one indicative of that is Katrina. Katrina hit Miami, skipped over Florida, got back out into the Gulf, and slammed into Louisiana, and it grew very fast. And these factors are really what helps cause hurricanes to grow stronger. And of course, the two main factors are water, temperature, and wind, which is why usually storms happen in the summer as opposed to the winter, but they can happen in the winter. Don't think they don't happen outside of these months, because they can. But because the water is warmer during these months, it tends to help hurricanes form easier. And Florida has dealt with hurricanes every month of the year, except for January and March. Those are the two that they've never dealt with one. And of course, like I said, June just started. There was a storm at the end of May, and we're just now going through it. And so it can happen at any time of the year. But the warmer weather, the warmer water temperatures, and the wind shifts that are more likely to happen from June to December make these the peak months. And actually, the worst month in these months is September. September is usually the worst month for Florida, and peak hurricane season is technically from August to October. The earliest hurricane to ever hit the state was Hurricane Alma on June 9th. So if Alex doesn't grow any further, Hurricane Alma can hold that record. And the latest was Hurricane Kate on November 21st. Now, hurricanes are obviously an issue for the state of Florida since we are surrounded by water on three sides. No part of Florida is actually safe from hurricanes because sometimes the storms are just so big that they may make landfall on, say, Lake Irma. Irma made landfall towards Naples, but it destroyed and wreaked havoc all the way through Jacksonville. There was flooding all the way in Jacksonville from Irma that hit and made landfall near Naples. Sorry, guys. No, I don't know. Allergies got me this week, so I apologize. But that being said, no part of Florida is safe. Florida has been the landing place of 4 of the top 10 most intense storms that has hit the U.S. The earliest known hurricane was in 1523 as a storm hit along the western coastline of the state. And there's actually recorded history in that because there's a lot of... So let's face it, a lot of reasons that Florida has a lot of shipwrecks is thanks to hurricanes that hit when people are along our coastline through the Florida Straits. And so it doesn't surprise me that we know of a hurricane in the 1500s thanks to the Spanish exploring in this area. Now, 159 storms were believed to hit the Sunshine State before 1900. And the strongest storm to hit was the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, which hit the Florida Keys. And it's also the strongest hurricane to hit the U.S. Now, the state's obviously been dealing with these since the 1500s, so it's not surprised that before the 1900s, it's believed that 6,500 known fatalities and over $102 million in damage believed to come from these storms that hit before the 1900s. That's only 159 storms. Now, the period from 1900 to 1949 brought 108 storms that resulted in $4.5 billion in damage and over 3,500 fatalities. Most of those fatalities sadly came from the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. 1947 was the worst year for the state within this time period, with 6 total storms hitting the state. Now, the next period, from 1950 to 1974, only saw 85 storms impact the state, and it caused a collective $7 billion in damage, with about 120 fatalities, either directly or indirectly from the storms. Hurricane Donna and Hurricane Dora were the 2 worst during this time period. And 1969 was the worst year during this time period, with 8 storms affecting the state. The next hurricane period would be 1975 to 1999, and this saw 83 storms hit the state and resulted in $5.1 billion in damage with 54 casualties. Now, Hurricane Andrew was the worst storm to hit the state during this period. I remember Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew is the reason Florida is part of the way it is today. That was a monstrous storm, and I'm surprised that parts of Florida even rebuilt after that. Now, 1985 was the most active season in this period, with 8 storms hitting the state. The next period is 2000 to today, so 2022 and beyond. And we've seen 79 storms hit the state in the last 22 years, but there have been many more devastating storms in this period. So far, we have over $123 billion in damages. Of course, most came from Hurricane Irma, followed shortly by Michael. In the current period, we've seen over 250 fatalities from the storm that was directly or indirectly. And when I say directly or indirectly, directly is more of the flooding, the storm surges to being swept away, and indirectly is someone had a problem and couldn't get supplies days later. So it's kind of two different things. 2004 and 2005 were some of the worst years for Florida during this period, seeing 8 storms hit each year. And of course, the strongest hurricane to hit the state in this period was Hurricane Michael in 2018. I remember that storm. We were living in Central Florida at the time, and it slammed into Mexico Beach in the Panhandle, and it destroyed it. It was a huge storm. And my favorite story from Hurricane Michael is that I had friends that were in Panama City vacationing. And Hurricane Michael was out in the Gulf, and it was churning, and it was getting bigger. And I'm like, hey, you guys probably should evacuate. No, we'll be fine. We're in a hotel. No, you guys should probably evacuate. Trust me. It's a hurricane. It's getting bigger. It's over Category 3. I know it's your vacation. Cut your losses. Go ahead and leave. No, we'll be fine. We got a couple bottles of water and some food. Okay, 12 hours before the storm hit. Michael's now a massive storm. You guys really need to leave. And I remember them messaging me at like 2 a.m. going, okay, well, we gave up. We're leaving. And Michael hit, and Michael destroyed the hotel. And I say this to say that I'm sorry if you're on vacation during these time periods, because these are the most, vacation in the summer. But if a Floridian is telling you to leave, best chances you should probably listen, guys. We deal with this stuff yearly. We're not going to leave if we don't have to. Shoot, if Waffle House isn't closing, I got a chance. I'll be fine. Waffle House closes, I'm getting out. Waffle House doesn't close. So I say that to say, listen to others. If someone's genuinely giving you care or concern, take the time to listen. I mean, make your own decisions, make educated decisions, but take the time to listen, guys, especially if you don't live here. Now, Florida has seen many major hurricanes that were Category 3 or higher. The earliest recorded Cat 3 or higher was in August of 1851, and it landed in Panama City. By the way, landfall happens when the eye of the storm officially touches land. A lot of Florida gets brushed by hurricanes without making an actual landfall. So, when I say landfall, I mean the eye of the storm actually breached the coastline of Florida. That's a technical landfall. And Florida has seen major storms almost every hurricane season that brush by or make landfall. The state has come back from some truly devastating hurricanes. And like I said, it kind of creates the Florida that we know today, whether it be Johns Pass that was created from a hurricane, or Volcano Beach in St. Augustine that was basically created by a hurricane, or parts of the Keys and part of South Florida that doesn't, like Mexico Beach, parts of it don't exist anymore because of a hurricane. So this really does shape not only the economic, but the geographical state of Florida now. And, there's really nothing you can do about it. You just pray that it doesn't destroy everything. And so I'm going to talk about a few of these storms today. And I'm going to talk about ones we've heard of and we haven't heard of. And guys, it's hurricanes in Florida. There have been so many, so we all know this is just part one. And I'm going to talk about some of the worst that I've lived through or I remember, and some that I obviously wasn't alive for and don't know, but, can say that we've definitely learned something from. And the first storm I'm actually going to talk about is one I mentioned earlier. It's also one I mentioned in one of my other podcasts, and it's the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. And I talked about this devastating storm in a past episode on the Florida Keys, because this hurricane truly impacted the Florida Keys and the state of Florida in obviously not a good way. Now, the Labor Day hurricane was one of the most intense storms to ever make landfall in the Western Hemisphere, and it actually had the lowest sea level pressure officially recorded on land. The wind estimates were between 186 and 189, and the storm was taken seriously, but I don't know, I guess because of a holiday they didn't react. I don't know, I feel like there could have been a better reaction to this storm. There was a warning that went out on September 1st. The Coast Guard warned boaters of an impending storm, and at 3:30 on Labor Day morning, another advisory predicted disturbance would pass through the Florida Straits on Monday and told of possible high tides and gales in the Keys. Well, at 1:30 the same day, so 10 hours later, an official hurricane warning was issued for Key West to Key Largo, so basically the whole chain of keys. Now, at 2 o'clock that day, a train was requested to evacuate the veterans working in the work camps in the Upper Keys. And these veterans were working on what today would be the Overseas Highway. They were working to create a highway that connected basically Miami to Key West. I do talk about it in my Florida Keys, so I won't be talking too much about that. But just know that there were a lot of veterans that had been sent down to Florida to work on this highway as part of a project. And so I feel that even waiting till 2 o'clock to request this train for these veterans was absolutely too late. And the train left late. It actually left at 4:25 from Miami, and it was delayed several times. And it only made it to I never can say this right, Islamorada by 8:20 p.m. So it took them 4 hours, basically, to get from Miami to Islamorada by train. And the arrival of the train was actually at the same time as a wind shift and a storm surge, and the train was taken off the tracks. Everybody survived, but it was a very scary situation and almost too late. Now, the hurricane left a path of destruction in the Upper Keys and really centered on Islamorada, which is where that train was when everything happened and it got hit. And the storm nearly destroyed every building on the Lower Metacumber and Long Key Islands. Bridges and embankments were washed away. The links that connected the islands with railroads, ferries, and rails were just gone. The Overseas Railroad, which was Henry Flagler's basic completion to the Keys, was completely destroyed, and the entire Islamorada area was wiped away. Craig Key, Long Key, Upper and Lower Metacumba Keys suffered the worst damage of the storm. The storm caused not only wind and flood damage all the way up to the Panhandle, but also into other parts of other states. It also caused significant damage in the Tampa Bay area due to the storm surges. Now, the storm left so much destruction and death in its wake that the people trying to rescue the survivors complained of just awful, deteriorating situations, especially considering that by the time they found or were actually able to get to the Keys, these people had been, killed by the storm and their bodies were left out. And after a hurricane leaves, Florida goes right back to being its sunny, humid, overly hot self, and so these people probably came into what can only be described as an apocalyptic scene. No infrastructure, no buildings, rotting corpses everywhere, and absolutely no way to take care of it. The death toll from this hurricane is estimated to be at 408 people, but they don't really know. And people that came down to help the survivors, what little survivors there were, reported just wooden coffins stacked all over the island. Now, as I had said that there were veterans working in the Keys, the veteran work camps were on Windley Key and Lower Metacumba Key, and they had 695 veterans working on the Overseas Highway. And these camps were established for veterans seeking work after returning from World War I. They were trying to get their pay and their pensions, and this is how they deemed that they could start getting that, by helping out with the infrastructure in the country. Now, the camps were not closed or evacuated during the storms, even after much urging from the veterans themselves. They just left them. They're like, oh, it'll be okay. It was not okay. The storm hit on Labor Day, so it's a holiday. I'm sure things were closed back then like they are today. And rescue efforts didn't actually reach the camp until September 4th when the weather improved. So not only did it storm and it hurricaned and it stayed, but it also took them days just to get down there due to destruction and still bad weather. The bodies of the storm victims were scattered all throughout the Keys, and due to warmer weather, the remains weren't able to be preserved as they could have been. And of course, the storm left ghastly conditions on the islands. The state of the islands were so bad that it created a quickly growing sanitation and humanitarian crisis, so much so that they actually banned the movement of any storm victims because of the fact that, one, they didn't know who half these people were. They couldn't find identification. There was no way to move them. There was no way to stop them from decaying. And moving them meant possible contamination of other things. So cremation and immediate burial processes were put into place to deal with the dead. And the cremations began on September 7th. And these efforts did not end until sometime in November. That is almost 2 months of cremating people because they didn't want to close these camps. And the official death toll was 257 veterans that died in the storm. To me, that is 257 too many. I know that due to the way technology is today, we have much more warnings and the ability to leave faster. We know what's going on sooner, but I mean, it was 1935. I feel like they had planes that could fly and see these things, and like they should have just, I don't know, they should have just known better. Now, the destruction and the aftermath of the storm was absolutely devastating, but of course the Keys prevailed and came back. You can still go visit them today. The storm also caused major changes to the way hurricanes are viewed and warnings are issued to people in its path, meaning that warnings are much sooner and evacuations happen a lot earlier than previous. So that's a good thing. And the storm also caused the Overseas Highway to be officially built as an evacuation route to the people in the Keys, just so that they have a way to flee the destruction of these storms. And if you do want to hear more about it, you can check out the Florida Keys episode I did back last year. It's a really good episode. It talks about all the Keys, but of course it does touch on this really devastating hurricane. Now, the next storm I'm going to talk about is Hurricane Donna. And Hurricane Donna was one of the strongest in the 1960 season, and it wreaked havoc on way more than just Florida. But Florida was actually the worst place impacted by the storm. The state actually received the most damage out of all the places because it also took the longest on land in Florida. And the storm hit the southern part of the state and then carved its way straight up through the Sunshine State. Now, the Florida Keys had the area, they've been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. And so when Donna came, they knew that this was going to be another bad storm. And some areas of the Keys actually got 14 inches of rain with winds hitting 150 miles per hour from Hurricane Donna. Miami saw sustained winds of 97 miles per hour. And the storm surges hit 13 feet in some areas and pushed tides well over 7 feet above normal. And I know a lot of people are like, 97 mile per hour winds, things are a lot worse. You're right, but sometimes it's not the wind, it's the storm surge and the flooding that really messes up an area, and that's kind of what Donna did. Of course, the Keys that were hit hardest from Donna were Marathon and, I hate saying this one, Tavernier. Let's go with Tavernier. And that's because the storm surge basically just took over and flooded the islands. The overseas highways were inundated. And in fact, 6 bridges between Marathon and Craig Key were completely swept away. And of course, this hurricane just brought back memories of the Labor Day hurricane that we just talked about with many similarities. The thing that Donna did, though, was that it disrupted a pipeline that supplied fresh water to most of the Keys. And it was actually damaged in 3 different places. So not only were the Keys dealing with no electricity, no way to get in and out, but now they had no fresh water. So that was just another issue of their rebuilding. Now, of course, as Hurricane Donna came on shore, the Miami-Dade County saw lots of destruction, especially towards Homestead, as the area was completely flooded from the rain and storm surges. The storm actually overturned many mobile homes, causing at least 1 fatality. And Donna was really the first hurricane to substantially damage Miami since Hurricane King in 1950. The hurricane caused massive loss of power in the area, but most of the damages came from the winds that shattered windows and sent trees flying around. The Everglades also saw damage as a large portion of the mangroves were destroyed in the storms. Everglades City didn't fare well as 50% of its buildings were damaged from the winds of the storm. And even on the other side of the state in Naples saw damage because the storm surge on that side also flooded many of those really nice $1 million homes and took out 900 feet of the pier. So neither side was safe from Hurricane Donna. Now, of course, the storm continued to pass up through the Sunshine State and cause damage in Bradenton. And it actually caused damage in Winter Haven, which is in Central Florida. Lots of wind damage in that storm. And it continued to move through the state. It went through Dade City, causing damage there, and even up in Volusia County, where wind damage was caused to many homes in the area. The storm altogether destroyed 2,200 homes and trailers, majorly damaged 4,000 homes, and caused at least some damage to over 40,000 homes. So this storm really did a lot of it. It seems like the wind and the storm surges were the really, really worst part of this storm. The storm also caused about 6,000 municipal buildings to be destroyed or damaged. 300 boats were damaged, and 50% of the grapefruit crop and 10% of the orange and tangerine crop were damaged. That year, the avocado crop was completely destroyed, and due to all these crops and the damages to the agriculture buildings and land and equipment, the actual agriculture was destroyed that year. They had a hard time even salvaging what they still had. The storm had 14 confirmed fatalities, and it was if you ever look at a picture of Hurricane Donna, and I'll post one on Instagram to go with the actual episode, but it is a large storm. It was huge. It reminded me of Irma, and because it caused so much damage and it went through the entire state. And of course, I've talked about Hurricane Donna in a couple of my other episodes. There's actually a theory that the I-4 dead zone drew Donna towards it. So, I don't know, believe what you want to believe, conspiracy theories, paranormals, whatever. But a lot of people say that the curse on the area for the I-4 dead zone is part of the reason that Donna came up through the middle of the state. I was rereading that and I was like, okay, all right, it is an I-4 dead zone, believe what you want. I don't know if it has enough pull to draw a hurricane, but that's cool if you believe that. The next hurricane I want to talk about is another bad one that I mentioned, and it's the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. And the 1928 hurricane is one of the most deadliest on record, and it's the third deadliest hurricane in the U.S. behind Hurricane Maria and the Galveston hurricane in the early 1900s. Or is it 1800s? I forgot to write a year. But there was a really devastating Galveston hurricane, and then Hurricane Maria, and then third comes in as the Okeechobee hurricane. And of course, this was in September, so peak hurricane season. The storm actually was first reported on September 6th by ships off the west coast of Senegal. So we're talking like this is in Africa. They spotted the storm right when it came off the coast. And of course, it was not observed again until September 10th in Guadalupe. And by the 10th, it was a confirmed hurricane and had strengthened a lot. Now, the storm was again observed in the Lesser Antilles in September 12th, and it was still intensifying. And it did hit Guadalupe with winds believed to be at 140 miles per hour. So that means the storm is officially at a Cat 4, and it's just now hitting Guadalupe. It still has a bit to get to Florida. The storm did continue towards Florida in a west-northwest track as it approached Puerto Rico, and it hit Puerto Rico on September 13th with winds measuring at 160 miles per hour. The storm continued to move from Puerto Rico up through the Bahamas before finally making landfall in Florida near West Palm Beach on September 17th with estimated winds at 145 miles per hour, gusting to 160. Now, of course, as the hurricane hit landfall, it did weaken, but as it passed over Lake Okeechobee, the hurricane maintained just enough strength due to its large size to cause absolute destruction. And the hurricane continued through the state of Florida and actually curved up to Jacksonville. By the next day, it was in Jacksonville with winds still sitting at 75 miles per hour and causing lots of damage. Now, this storm was well documented even off the coast of Africa all the way to Florida, and a lot of people that were documenting it kept hoping that it would turn and spare southern Florida. And it didn't. Obviously, it didn't turn. And the finalization that it would hit Florida was when it hit the Bahamas on September 15th. So it hit the Bahamas on the 15th, and then it made landfall in Florida on the 17th. So it's 2 days. And of course, as soon as it hit the Bahamas, they began to issue storm warnings from Miami to Titusville and said that it was going to be a bad storm. And it was. The storm actually hit with winds well over 100 miles per hour along Lake Worth, Palm Beach, and West Palm Beach areas in the state of Florida. And the hurricane probably wouldn't have been so bad if it hadn't have put a trajectory over Lake Okeechobee. And they had lots of damage to buildings, infrastructure, and, a lot of other things that go with hurricanes, storm surges, flooding, rain, along the area it actually got hit. And the good thing is that because they issued those warnings on the 15th, there were minimal lives lost due to these warnings. But the storm curved in just enough to go to Lake Okeechobee, which is not far from the West Palm Beach area. I would say no more than an hour. Having lived in that area and gone to Lake Okeechobee, it's not more than an hour from the West Palm Beach area. And the reason that it really destroyed the area around Lake Okeechobee so much so was because when the residents received the warnings earlier in the day to evacuate, they did. And the area around Lake Okeechobee is really low-lying. And it really is. It's part of the Everglades. It's marsh. It's swamp. And, of course, the sides of the lake have been built up. So, of course, anything around the lake is obviously lower than the lake. Now, when these people left, they thought the hurricane was going to hit in the morning. Well, the hurricane didn't hit in the morning. In fact, people actually went home thinking that the hurricane had come and gone. But it hadn't. It arrived way later than expected, and these people got caught in it. And the other thing leading up to the problem of the Lake Okeechobee hurricane was that the entire season that summer, it had been a rainy season. So there was already problems with flooding. The lake was already at its highest level. There was water standing in the marshy areas. And this thing is going to bring storm surges and flooding and rain with it, and there's just nowhere for it to go. Now, when the hurricane had finally approached the already flooded lake, it caused the storm surge to easily breach the small levees and ditches that contain the overflow. And the flooding began, and it spread 450 feet easily out from the lake. So this thing inundated all the areas around it, even going for miles. And the water was 20 feet deep in some places. So you're talking well over the height of most small houses. The buildings and the houses were easily swept from the areas and took victims into the trees and into the Everglades. It destroyed anything and everything in its path. Crops, farming tools, levees, buildings, everything was destroyed. Now, Kramer Island had received the warnings, but they were too late, and the island is in the lake, and there were 20 to 30 people trying to shelter in location while this storm is hitting this lake. These homes were swept into the trees, but most people were actually able to survive on the island in the lake, so they didn't have a huge death rate off of Kramer Island. But the residents of Torrey Island didn't fare so well, as the building they sought shelter in got pushed into the canal. The survivors didn't make it as they were swept into the trees or were taken out by local wildlife, most likely bit by water moccasins or alligators. God, that's a way to go. Now, the towns around Lake Okeechobee suffered just catastrophic damage, but Belle Glade suffered the worst. And this is a cute little town, but this town, it's come back. If you ever go down there, it's a really cute little place to visit, but it got destroyed. There was actually 611 confirmed fatalities just from Belle Glade alone. The dikes lining the lake actually failed, and the water flooded into the town, with some parts being over 7 feet deep. Now, a lot of people took shelter in the town buildings, such as the Glades Hotel, and the Glades Hotel is 2 stories. No, sorry, it's 3 stories. So they're in the bottom floor. The water starts coming in. They go running up the stairs, and there's actually stories of the last 2 people up the stairwell almost drowned from the rising waters. They almost didn't make it. And of course, the hotel didn't fare well, as the roof also later blew off. So they're facing rising waters or the rain coming in. It was a no-win situation. Now, the water near the Everglades Experiment Station reached 3 feet deep, which meant all the crops were ruined. The people did stay safe there, but agriculturally, everything was gone. The wind speed there was hitting 92 miles an hour before it was destroyed. So we don't really know how strong the winds were, but we can assume that they were over 92 miles per hour. The city of Pahokee, which also sits on the edge of the lake, ended up looking like an island after the storm. Now, the city of Pahokee sits on a ridge outside the lake, so it looked like an island after everything all the lake water flooded out. And the low-lying areas were just absolutely flooded. Homes were swept from their foundations, and the deaths in this area occurred when people actually tried to retreat up the river as it flooded. 75% of the buildings and homes were absolutely destroyed. The bank and schoolhouse were the only 2 buildings standing in any kind of condition, and they weren't in good condition. There were 153 deaths confirmed in just Pahokee. So between Belle Glade and Pahokee were well up to almost 800 deaths. South Bay is another small town around the lake that was wiped out. All the buildings lost their roofs, and any building that didn't suffer roof damage just floated away. The boats and buildings in the canals were noted to be at odd angles or capsized, and water swept them from the edges of the canal and back out into the lake or into the Everglades. There was destruction and broken limbs, trees, and ruined agriculture crops everywhere. The death toll in this area was 247, so we've now hit over 1,000. And the town was actually abandoned after the storm because where it sat, it had flooded several times, and so after a while they just gave up and said, this isn't a town anymore. Can't say I blame them. Beantown was another small town that was completely destroyed on the edge of the lake. It doesn't exist anymore. Lake Harbor was destroyed with only the hotel standing. There were 99 fatalities, but the Lake Harbor got the worst of it because they were more of a farming community with livestock, and animal carcasses came to rest on the canal banks because all the livestock in the town perished. Now, the wind reversed at some point and sent the water surging in another direction. So that was just the south part of the lake. Now the north part's getting it. So the north shore saw major damage, but of course less than the actual south bank. The water on the bridge took out Route 98 at Connors Highway, which caused many travel issues, and they actually didn't get it fixed from September through, I think, January, it said. Okeechobee County saw storm surges that severely impacted or destroyed homes near the shore, including major damages in the actual city of Okeechobee, which literally sits on the edge of the lake. It's a cute little town. It's fun to go. You can drive around the edge of the lake. Actually, I talk about it in my Lake Okeechobee episode. But I'm not surprised that city was flooded. It is right there. Now, the city saw major damage with winds reaching 90 miles per hour. A lot of the 3-story buildings collapsed, but anything that was brick buildings remained standing. All the roads in and out of the area were damaged or left completely impassable, and communications were completely wiped out. The storm caused 27 deaths in Okeechobee County alone. Clewiston and Moorhaven also saw flooding and strong winds, and the railroad tracks were said to be a ribbon of steel when the storm passed. The flooding in the area persisted for several weeks, which actually stopped any attempt to clean it up because where was the water going to go? It was going to go in the lake. Oh, the lake's still flooded, the levees are flooded, the river's flooded, the Everglades flooded, and the sun's just not soaking it up fast enough. So basically the complete destruction of the area, and some areas still had 2 feet of water standing a month after the storm. That's how much rain and overflow this storm surge was in this area. Now, of course, the storm did affect areas other than Lake Okeechobee, but that was just the most with the fatalities. Fort Myers saw property damage, bridges and roadways were washed away. There's actually roadways washed away all the way up to Stewart. Fort Pierce actually was flooded on its waterfront with over 150, over 150, words, y'all just left me. $150,000 in damages just on its waterfront because it flooded its fishery area and its waterfront and its warehouses. Areas of Central Florida were also impacted with agriculture damage from high winds. Bartow saw damage to buildings and even one death when a building fell in on someone. The cigar cities in Tampa on the other side of the state had to close due to high winds and rain, and of course causing too much moisture in the actual factory. Tree damage was seen all the way up to Brooksville, and then slight damage up in Jacksonville Beach, as well as flooding. Now, the storm left a lot of death and destruction in its path and all over parts of Florida. Shelters were set up in South Florida to deal with survivors, and the Miami Health Department actually kind of got smart because they knew that this was going to be a humanitarian crisis, so they started vaccinating against smallpox, typhoid, and tetanus due to the damage in the standing water. They also had to combat looting. Looting was really bad from West Palm Beach to Palm Beach, and that meant curfews had to be put in place. Militias and the National Guard had to be sent out to make sure that curfews were obeyed. Looting is still a thing. Looting will always be a thing after hurricanes, and I think that is the worst of people. Someone just lost all of their stuff and their belongings, and their house is flooded, and you're going to go in and you're going to steal from them? That's rude. Sorry, side rant. So the area around Lake Okeechobee had a tough time because there were minimal supplies, no working vehicles, no passable roads, no fresh water, and of course no communications. So Dr. Buck really kind of took over and decided that, he's in charge, he's going to have to get people help. So he sent 100 women and children to walk towards West Palm Beach. West Palm Beach is 42 miles from where they were at, outside of Lake Okeechobee. And that was their best effort. When your best effort is to walk 42 miles to survive, you know things are bad. Now, the women and children did start walking, and they were eventually met by ambulances and taken to West Palm Beach. They managed to get the roads cleared from around the Belle Glade area to Clewiston, and thanks to Dr. Buck, who took charge, they were able to get this done faster than expected. Now, the Red Cross also came to help the survivors, took in refugees and storm victims, give out supplies, and help them. They said that it looked like a disaster area. Now, the death toll from this hurricane was one of the worst in the Sunshine State. And, of course, the death toll was higher in the lower economic areas and low-lying grounds right around the area of Lake Okeechobee, especially since these people had already returned home thinking that the hurricane had passed. 75% of the fatalities were sadly migrant farm workers, most of whom were African American. Now, this is probably one of the worst ways I've ever seen someone handle a hurricane, and I'm glad that we've moved past this point for the most part. I can't imagine this going over too well today. The surviving African American men were ordered at gunpoint to gather the bodies of the deceased. One man refused and was immediately shot on sight. And the men who collected the bodies were given a bootleg ration of whiskey. Thank you, Prohibition, but at least someone was still smart enough to hand out whiskey. They were given gloves that were disinfected and told to work from sunup to sundown, and then there was another group that would work the reverse. So day and night, this process took, time. They had to find the bodies. They were in the trees. They were in the Everglades. Some never got seen again. And it wasn't a fun or a pretty job. And the way they would do it, and I looked this up. I don't even know, but they would tie the deceased ankles together and then stack them in a truck. I just feel like that is a really, really bad way to handle the deceased, but maybe that's just me. Now, the process went on through October and actually finally stopped on November 1st when they either assumed that they were never going to find the rest of the people or Mother Nature had taken its toll. The mass amount of victims means that some were in coffins, some were cremated, some were placed in mass graves, and other were put on funeral pyres because this was causing a health crisis. Mass graves were created in West Palm Beach, Port Mayaca, Lake Harbor, Ortona, Sebring, and there's an unconfirmed mass grave in Loxahatchee. This hurricane did one thing for the state of Florida that probably wasn't great. It actually officially stopped the land boom. So people were done buying land in Florida after this horrible hurricane, which meant that Florida was sent into an economic crunch. But since it's 1928, the next year the crash of Wall Street did nothing to help the Sunshine State recover from this hurricane. So it actually took a lot longer to recover from this hurricane than expected due to the fact that tourism's gone, citrus industry is completely destroyed. You're having to rebuild entire infrastructure, and you've just lost a large amount of people that were living there. The area around Okeechobee was the hardest hit and continued to see problems because, so there was a Miami hurricane in 1926, there was the wet seasons, and now this hurricane. So there was a lot to be rebuilt in this area. Thankfully, though, they took this very seriously, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started building actual flood control measures around the lake. The Herbert Hoover Dike was completed around the lake. Side note, this is the part you can actually drive on today. And has been maintained and upgraded over the years so that another disaster like this doesn't happen when a large storm pass over South Florida. And because it is a hurricane season every year, it's really not just a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. So I know that I've talked about some hurricanes in Florida today, and I hope that we understand to take this seriously. I mean, yeah, if it's Cat 3, I'm probably not going to evacuate. If it's Cat 5 coming, like Andrew, it's just things. I can always buy more things. And I know that I didn't talk about some of the ones that we know of today, so Matthew, Andrew, Michael, Irma, any of the ones from the 2004 or 5 season, and I will. Like I said, this is just part 1. Florida has seen its fair share of hurricanes and monster storms, and since they take aim at Florida yearly, we have lots to talk about. Now, I can say that thankfully because of these storms, even the ones I haven't talked about, we have improved our building codes and our infrastructures, and we're ready or more ready than we were for hurricanes each year. It seems like we kind of improve a little bit each year. Now, that doesn't mean we don't need to prepare or that we're ever 100% ready. So please be aware that since we now officially are in hurricane season, we do need to get ready. It's actually tax-free weekend right now. I believe it goes through the 11th, so you have about another week. So yeah, go buy a pack of batteries, go buy some water. It doesn't go bad. It's not like you have to drink by dates. Pick up a pack of beef jerky, Nutri-Grain bars. But, take it seriously, because even if a Cat 3 hits, your power goes out, you can't cook your frozen chicken and french fries, guys. You got to have something. You got to be prepared a little bit. But I know that when hurricanes come, we'll deal with shortages and weather and other issues. But in Florida, we have to deal with something so much worse. We still have to deal with Florida Man. Hurricane or not, Florida Man does not go away. And today, Florida Man comes to us from Key West. A Florida man was arrested for biting off part of a tourist's ear during a fight in a hotel. Okay. All right. He watched a couple too many boxing matches. No, I'm kidding. A man from Port St. Lucie was arrested after he got into a fight after he insulted a woman. Apparently, there was a couple people walking back from a bar. Somebody was using a wheelbarrow to wheelbarrow a drunk woman back to her bar, which I think that is the most epic Florida thing ever. And apparently the guy pushing the wheelbarrow decided to be just a complete dick to the woman, and some other guy stood up for her, and they became combative, which obviously led to a fight. And somehow this man thought the upper hand in this fight would be to bite off another part of someone's ear. So guys, not only is Florida Man stupid and usually drugged up, but apparently they might be partly cannibal right now. We're still looking into this. So don't be Florida Man. Be prepared, guys. Be careful out there. It is hurricane season now. I hope that if you are in the part of the storm that comes and brings us a lot of rain and wind, that you guys stay safe, stay dry, have fun, stay hydrated, wear your sunscreen, guys. Thank you so much for the past year. Here's to many more years. If you have a second, like, subscribe. I would love a review on Apple or Spotify. You guys have always been amazing in that, so thank you so much for your continued support, guys. If you have any questions, comments, reach out on any of the social media sites. You can email me at thatfloridafeel@gmail.com. Getting your emails kind of makes my day, especially those of you who I interact with on Instagram and Facebook. You guys are always so much fun. Don't forget to tag me in your stuff so I can share it with all the other fun Florida lovers out there. So guys, thank you again. I love each and every one of you. You've helped make this successful. So as always, guys, that's your daily dose of sunshine.